Attention, please. If I could have your attention, please.
Drop pressure, baby, when you wind and fall.
DJ, please sound.
Boy, of course. You're killing the boy, of course. You're killing the boy. Extra pressure, baby, when you wind and fall. You're killing the boy, of course. You're killing the boy, of
Would like to begin the session now. How is everyone doing?
course.
How was breakfast? Okay. Good morning again. How is everyone today? How was breakfast? Good? Okay, my name is Edwin Kimani, Resource Mobilization Officer by day, cat dad, and poet by night, and your host for today. I will be taking over from the remarkable Kipto Chemoyo, who did a fantastic job. A round of applause for him. So it's a beautiful day, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. And we have a remarkable lineup of panel discussions, conversations around the theme of a resilient Africa. Yesterday, we heard from the Cardinal Turkson about moving from stewardship to care. We heard that the call of the poor is the call of the earth. We heard that resilience is climate action, resilience is peace building. We heard of the need for hope in our endeavors and the importance of working with the youth. No longer about youth empowerment because the youth are already empowered. How many youth are here today? Today you're gonna shine, okay? And so we'd like to move to Chancellor Suarez to give his opening remarks as we begin the day. A healthy round of applause for him, please.
Good everyone. It is wonderful to see you energized with your beautiful smiles and ready to take our work to the next level. I am deeply honored to acknowledge the presence of His Excellency Archbishop Philip Anyolo. Archbishop, welcome. Yesterday, we had an extremely productive day. We heard from multiple stakeholders, multiple perspectives in an intersectoral, interdisciplinary, and comparative set of reflections and presentations that were truly enlightening in enabling us to move as the Holy Father has tasked us, Pope Leo, from talk to action. The presentations yesterday embodied the Platonic ideal when Plato imagined the idea of education. He reminded us that the true value of education is the pursuit of truth, logic, and science. It's the pursuit of beauty, aesthetics. We are in such a beautiful setting in this magnificent part of Africa. And Plato reminded us it is the pursuit of justice. Truth, beauty, and justice are the fundamental blocks for an education to prepare the next generations for lives of fulfillment lives of engagement, true environmental citizenship. As the world continues to face the invasion of inequality into every domain of economy and society, our endeavors now and moving forward are more urgent than ever before. The last words the Holy Father, Francis, said to me in his home in Casa Santa Marta, adelante, Marcelo, siempre adelante. Always forward. Quoting from St. Ignatius. Today, we have another day of work. We're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to take on some of the other domains that began yesterday to complete this, which is a beginning of the remaining summits around the world. But Africa will always be at the center of the innovation that is fundamental for us to build a more inclusive, a more democratic, a more sustainable, a more humane world. Thank you, Excellency. We are honored by your presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. Another round of applause, please. Now, Chancellor, I'd like to borrow very quickly from something you said yesterday during lunch, that as we nourish our bodies, we're also here to nourish our minds. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to think of today as a sumptuous banquet of the mind. And I want you to put your hands together as we ready the first course and the first serving of today's knowledge banquet to discuss resilience to climate change, extreme weather impacts, and water systems. I welcome panelist Priscilla Wainaina, scientist, governance, equity, and well-being, C4 ICRAF. Welcome to the stage. Ivy Murugi, junior manager, education and impact, World Scouting. Alexander Fenwick, WHH County Director, Somalia. Collins Shava, Youth Policy and Partnerships Officer, African Wildlife Foundation. Thomas Rewe, Co-Chair, Green Bioeconomy Coalition of Africa, Working Group, and Associate Professor at Pwani University, a true feast for today's intellectual buffet. And last but definitely not least, the moderator for this session, the able Joseph Kamau, lead Global Health Program, Kenya Institute of Primate Research, who will be moderating the session. I hand it over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I think the only name I remember is the poet, but I've forgotten the name. Yes. So try to recap and maybe pick from what we covered yesterday, although the Cardinal did mention a couple of things for us yesterday, and also the Chancellor has reminded us. But just speaking from what our conversation yesterday, so that we can be able to handle our topic today, That will be different from what maybe, given my background and where I'm coming from the public health. So I want maybe to take from the word garden is what I took yesterday, the garden, and that's personal touch care that we need maybe to give to the garden. And when we don't do that, then what happens to us? So from yesterday, we had that failure to do that, then the repercussion, huge repercussion. If you don't give the care, then the environment will not have any mass on us. We'll have that large and huge impact on us. And some of that, I remember that one of the speakers yesterday did mention some of that, of those large impact. One is loss of property. The second one was loss of livelihood. The third one, but not in order of importance, is loss of biodiversity or change of biodiversity. The other most important from where we come from is loss of peace or conflict that comes with that. But the ultimate price that we give or sometimes we pay is loss of life. So why? Why does it happen? Unfortunately, when we talk much of the climate change, we talk about what we can see, what we can feel, or what we can touch. But many times forget what we call the smaller five, the little ones that you cannot see, the little ones that you cannot touch, but very important when it comes to the ecosystem. Who are those little five or the smaller five? The insects, the smaller carnivores, the birds, but most important, the microbiome. How much important is microbiome in whatever we are discussing yesterday and today when it comes to carbon sink? It's quite important. But many times we don't talk about that. We talk about the tree that has fallen because we can see. The loss of glacier because we can see. So unfortunately, those smaller five do not have a way to communicate or to have a summit like this, right? But they have various ways to reach us. They reach us and they communicate very strongly to us. How do they communicate? So when they communicate through the loss of our lives, the loss of our animals. I don't know whether we know the number of deaths that occurs daily in Kenya. Anybody who has an idea the number of deaths that occurs daily in Kenya or globally? So according to WHO, World Health Organization, 1 in every 4 deaths is associated with environmental modifiable factors. In other words, 1 in every 4 means 25%. So if you're talking about 1,000 deaths daily, so from yesterday, maybe at 8 to today at 8 morning, 1,000 people have died in Kenya. And 25% of that is due to environmental modifiable factors. We cannot underscore the importance of this summit because that's reversible. It's irreversible change. So 80% of infection, of human infection, are also associated with the modifiable factors from the environment. So that's how the smaller 5 communicate to us. That's how they hold their summit. And their summit is through the loss of our lives. the loss of our livelihood, the loss of our animals. So when yesterday, the CEO talked about the garden, and the Cardinal talked about that personal care that we need to give. And the little things that Wangari Maathai reminded us, those smaller things that we do, they matter a lot. Those smaller things that we do matter a lot because they reduce that impact. From the 25%, we can reduce to 10 to 5%. That's doable. And through this summit, I'm sure that's doable. So those little things, the panel here have been doing them. And today we'll want to basically hear their story about those little things. So with me here in the panel, I think they have been introduced. Priscilla, here from C4ICRAF, Ivy, who will be handling, basically we are handing our baton to Ivy, the young one. As yesterday we discussed about handing the generational change. Thomas, the professor, will tell us about the change or the role of the university. We'll want to hear how that's happening. But let's just kick the discussion for the panel. So starting maybe from Collins. Those little things that you're talking about, in your own way, I'm sure you've been doing that. So my question to you, what are the challenges or opportunities for locally led community resilience where you come from that you think are basically trying to mitigate the challenges that we're having today?
Thank you, moderator, and I hope I'm clear enough. My name is Collins, as introduced, and I'm going to talk about two things that you said, moderator. I'm going to talk about the issues of loss of biodiversity and also peace in my submission. And I'm going to talk about my story from the Mid-Zambezi Valley in Zimbabwe, where you find communities that are living in the Mid-Zambezi Valley who live in a biodiversity-rich community where people live with wildlife. And I'll talk about the challenges that are associated and how climate change is affecting communities of such nature. This is a community which receives less than 650 millimeters of water every year because they are in Region 5, which is classified as arid and not so favorable for conditions, and it's also high temperatures that even go to 45 degrees sometimes. And these are communities where there's rich wildlife. There are elephants, there are lions, there's the big five that you might think about. And in these communities, they are facing a bigger challenge now with climate change. With climate change, that 650 millimeters has even been reduced to about 350 millimeters a year. And that means there is low rainfall in that area, and that means there are poor harvest each time in the year. And how communities survive is that they normally then go into riverbanks to plant during the time of off-season. They go into riverbanks and plant, which is an illegal activity according to our law, but that's the way they can be resilient. And if you want to go and fight them off from that, then you lose your political base if you're a politician, or you also lose your credibility even if you're a local authority. But apart from that, even if they try to adapt and dig in the riverbeds, they are now facing a bigger challenge that climate change is not only affecting humans, but it's also driving wildlife out of the protected areas to look for food in human-concentrated areas. This has resulted in increased human and wildlife conflict or human and wildlife fights. That have even, in the first quarter, there have been over 60 cases of human-wildlife conflict, which some have resulted into deaths, where people are trampled by elephants that are looking for food, or they are beaten by crocodiles when looking for water. And the people who are looking for water in the rivers are the women and children that are tasked with those chores to do that. So you can see the difficulties that these communities are feeling, and how climate change is driving these little things of human wildlife conflict and human wildlife trying to thrive within people concentrated areas. Additionally, as humans, as we're trying to adapt as well, we have found ourselves blocking what were previously wildlife corridors. And wildlife remembers where it walked, or where the generations of other wildlife, of other herds walked. And they want to walk that journey again. Then they find people, they find food along the way. Then they find themselves fighting with people, and people are losing their lives. And people in the process, they are also having challenges of even fending for their own livelihoods, because their crops that they are growing within riverbeds is also gone. So it's a paradox, and you can see how the relationship and how climate change is even causing problems for communities, complex problems that we might not be able to solve. But I do have a story of hope from the Mid-Zambezi Valley, where the young people have been trying by all means to ensure that they also support their own communities to deal with human and wildlife conflict. Young people are at the front lines of being community guardians, of being community scouts. When there is wildlife in the area, they come at the front lines to disperse that wildlife. They come in the front lines also to support families by also helping them grow their crops, and also helping them guard their crops from the wildlife. And this is what young people are doing. They are also not ending there. They are also taking steps to also develop community gardens, which some of the work that AWF is also doing within the Mid-Zambezi Valley to support those community gardens, so that people can be able to fend for themselves. So these are some of the stories that we see and that we look at, and we should also be able to look at, even from a policy perspective, that there are communities that are living in wildlife and biodiversity rich areas. How do we continue to support them from a policy perspective at the community level, and also at the national level, and even taking the gospel to the international scenarios? And you can see that the issues of human wildlife conflict, the more they continue, the more there's effects of climate change, the more they continue, the more people lose their livelihoods, the more people lose their lives. So we need to also push that gospel. If you have a chance to go into the international fora, please push for the Loss and Damage Fund to also include losses that happen when biodiversity is driven into people areas, and people lose their lives and livelihoods. I thank you.
Thank you, Collins. I think that, can you hear me? Yeah. Unfortunately, where we live and the numbers keep growing, I think that human wildlife conflict will just continue. But yesterday when I was seated somewhere back there in the back, someone told me, apart from the smart farming, we also have the smart herding, or the smart when it comes to livestock production. And he walked me through some of the things that I basically took some notes about it, and we can share maybe after this. But just going to the next panelist, Priscilla. I know yesterday when we were discussing about how to do some of these mitigations, one of the problems that came when Eric from the banker, from the KCB, talked about the youth, and maybe also somehow maybe the rush maybe to make some money, and why maybe some of if they don't make basically the return, they kind of drop whatever mitigation they're trying to do. So it has been hard to kind of convince the young ones, or even us, to take some of those mitigation in case they don't have some returns, because you don't want again to invest where you can't be able to make return. But we know that in resilience mitigation, there are opportunities. So my question to you, what economic strategies or measures can we employ in response to extreme events like what we have that driven from the climate change?
Thanks a lot, Joseph. In response to that, I will discuss what we at C4 Aircraft we've been doing, the projects we've been rolling out. And among that is when we do restoration is very key for C4 Aircraft. And we work among smallholder farmers a lot. And we do restoration, we do it on their farmlands. And this comes with opportunity cost. Such that when they do restoration, they put up that tree, that land could have been used for something else. That's what we call the opportunity cost, the cost forgone. And because of this, to maintain this restoration, there's need to incentivize these farmers, smallholder farmers particularly, such that they keep that tree for long, they keep the restoration efforts for long. And among what we've been doing are things like payment for ecosystem services, particularly the carbon markets. We've been doing a lot of that for the last 4 years, voluntary carbon markets among its smallholder farmers. And when you talk about smallholder farmers in Africa, these are farmers on average, they have 1 to 2 hectares of land. And what we've been doing is designing this carbon project. And what we realized is that carbon, given the volatility in carbon prices, carbon, the returns, the carbon price itself will not incentivize these farmers alone to keep the trees for long, given that it's fluctuating and sometimes it's not enough incentive. So such that when you design such project, it's necessary to design them in such that their restoration, carbon, and also a big part goes to livelihoods, which sometimes misses in some of these carbon projects. And this livelihood is how you incentivize these smallholder farmers to keep these trees for long. And also, when you talk about this carbon project, they're not without their own challenges in that they're very costly in themselves, such that most people miss out on the livelihoods part. And what we've been doing on the livelihoods part is mostly working with farmers, getting them to identify their value chains they would like to prioritize. We assess these value chains, we see the gaps, the intervention that would yield better returns, and we inform proper business models depending on each case, and work together with these farmers and also with other stakeholders so that we can intervene in this. Another scenario is creation of green jobs, which was discussed yesterday about de-risking. Most of these nature-based enterprises, they are highly risk such that even farmers cannot access credit because they're risky, and because they have long payback periods. From our analysis, we found that most of these nature-based enterprises would tend to break even at year 3, such that in year 1 and 2, there's no cash flow. So most banks or most lenders would shun away from such, investing in such. So what we've been doing is we've also been trying to de-risk approaches where we de-risk this. For example, a successful case we did this was in Cameroon. Different project. This was not a carbon project, where we had some model with performance-based financing model, where we set up these enterprises, we give them initial funding, and we give them business advisory services, and then we take them through this performance-based financing. We set up like a set of indicators such that if this enterprise hits this indicator, then we give them a second batch of financing, and we walk them through, and then we found that they would break even at year 3, such that after year 3, these enterprises would run on their own without this capital. And after that is when we link them with investors and off-takers and private, and from there they can pick up. So I think a key thing on these nature-based enterprises is there's need to de-risk them if you want to link them with private investors. And also a key lesson we've learned along the ways is that most of these most of the lenders are not willing to go there. So there's need to set up what we call green enterprise funds, such that most of these enterprises can come back to this. They are usually low interest. We set them such that they are low interest, and the payback period can start from year 2 or year 3 after these enterprises have broken even. And so that's something we're trying to replicate. We've sent out proposals to various donors, particularly the GCF on this, so that we can upscale this to other countries. And basically, and then one thing we found out is that you de-risk this, you create green jobs for the youths, also for the other members. You see a reduction in misuse of natural resources, such that people will not overharvest the non-timber forest product, will not do these harmful activities such as charcoal burning. It will reduce significantly. So that's one approach at C4 Aircraft we've been doing in addition to the carbon projects. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. It's good to hear that there's some formula to basically, give hope to the young ones or to the young generation that they can be able to invest to the mitigation, and the opportunities there. They can be able to make a business model and be able to take care of the nature through that way. Many times we hear about climate, and sometimes the names being used, like yesterday we heard about the natural disaster or extreme events, some wording needs kind of understanding. People need to be walked through to understand what wording, because some wording you can use and sometimes they can mean differently. And so we are lucky here to have the professor from the university, Thomas, and we would want to understand from Thomas, what's the role of the university, or basically the higher education learning institution and research? What's their role do they have when it comes to climate resilience? And also kind of trying to do away with the myths and the perception or belief some of the community may be having, and maybe less uptake of the mitigation.
Thank you very much, Joseph. I'll write on the protocol set before me. I see the Cardinal, I don't know if the Cardinal is here, the Chancellor, Professor Brown, and colleagues and researchers, the youth, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first begin by rebuking ourselves as the university community. One of the things we have been doing is retrospective reporting, because the role of the university as it is, as knowledge managers, we have been looking after the event. For example, if I ask you, allow me to be a teacher for a moment, what do these cities have in common? Dakar, Banjul, Conakry, Abidjan, Lomé, Lagos, Brazzaville, Mombasa, Dar es Salaam, Maputo, Beira, Nakala, Bogumili, Durban. What do they have in common? The landmass that they occupy is almost 30% of Africa. So if you look at some of the state-of-the-art, what you calling this, climate change reports that are coming out, 250 million have been affected by extreme weather events. If we continue that trend, by 2050, we'll be at 700 million. These are some of the most populated cities in Africa. If we continue looking at livelihoods, you're talking of 34% reduction in agricultural production. Where did this data come from? You'll probably get an answer from a university. And then the question is, so what? You are reporting gloom and doom, and we've been doing that a lot, reporting what climate change has done. And it's a terrible report, of course. It can wake up people, create some emotions. But the role of the university is transforming, Joseph. And the transformation we are doing now is to join the communities of practice. We are not monopolies of knowledge as much as we are intellectuals. So the communities of practice and the living labs are unique. And the role of the university is to be evidence creators within the community of practice. And if I use an example, when we joined the community of practice as a university, the Netherlands Development Organization and other stakeholders, including one of the most important partners called the Farmer Field School. The Farmer Field School became the lab. Every stakeholder is co-creating solutions for climate resilience. Right now, for example, Pwani University is working with Kwetu Training Center for Sustainable Development on the coast for mangrove conservation, what we are calling the coastal green zone, protecting the green zone along the coastal belt and doing many other things, but not as a university, but as a community of practice. So I would put it to us that the role of the university has to move away from the ivory tower of publishing and depositing information in libraries, which is good. It makes us promoted to professor. But joining a community of practice and putting our foot forward as evidence creators so that that information can be translated co-creatively to what we call best practices. And that is what we intend to do as a university. And right now, working with the Bioeconomy Coalition of Africa, and supported by the National Research Fund, we're thinking of a bigger African alliance, which is, of course, being supported by international partners like the European Bioeconomy University, to form the Africa Bioeconomy University. And it will not just be an ivory tower because it's not brick and mortar. It's going to be a community of practice, a living lab, and it will have many other stakeholders so that our role can be proactive. The medics here will tell you prevention is better than cure. I'm just obeying Genesis 2:15 to take care. Thank you, Joseph.
Community of practice. So when you start recruiting, so you can count me there. So yeah, thank you for, because the university has, and always will be, some of us, we are beneficial of that. So I think it's good to hear from you. Yesterday we heard from the chief climate from California or US. Okay. They are more stable there. And also the lady from the island. In developed world, it's more, I think, easier to push the agenda or the discussion we are having. But in some region or in Africa, and some areas that we are, a little bit, it becomes a little bit hard even to talk to the community themselves, because you have to go through layers of structures. But we would want to hear from Alexander. Alex, you've been able to work in a very fragile environment where potentially may be structures, governance, which we could let in some areas, even here in Kenya. So in your own context, what does a holistic approach to climate resilience look like in such a fragile environment, which is very different from what we had from US or what happens maybe in Ireland?
Thanks very much. Well, the interesting thing about Somalia is that it's very different now, but it's also a good indicator of what's just around the corner in the course of climate change for this region more generally. My organization, WHH, has a mandate for hunger. WHH is Welthungerhilfe, German. How's my pronunciation? So hunger, we focus on livelihoods. And we see with the climate crisis in Somalia, a broken link between natural resources and livelihoods. Yeah. Our approach to addressing that broken link is through rangelands management, landscape restoration. And what we're trying to do is restore grasslands and water supplies for pastoralists. You know? And that's, in theory, a very simple thing to do. If you stop grazing, then grasslands restore, and they can restore in the space of a year or even less. It can be quite impressive under the circumstances. So to do that, to encourage non-grazing, we provide cash incentives to the communities. The communities work with us to demarcate a space, not demarcated with a fence, but with an agreement amongst the community, to simply leave the land to restore. And then the cash incentive is the construction of soil and water conservation structures within that space, yeah? So grasslands restore, sometimes even rainfall is restored. And then very quickly you see the link between the natural resource basis for pastoralism and people's livelihoods. But the problem that we have, the sustainability challenge that we have, is how to do that without a cash injection. Yeah. And that leads me to this great challenge of getting a holistic understanding of resilience, maybe to your question. So for me, with protected rangelands and restored grasses and pasture also comes a host of livelihoods opportunities. So there's cut and carry fodder, restoring grasslands and then taking a sustainable amount. There's the production of sustainable charcoal at the small scale. And there's beekeeping, there's production of useful tree species, things like this. All of these are ways of adapting restored grasslands, yeah, for livelihoods. So in my view, at the community level, you can't do resilience without doing livelihoods, yeah? And you have to see livelihoods and the economic basis really to have a holistic understanding. That's one aspect. The other aspect, maybe a level above the community level for me, is the place of humanitarian aid in resilience. And what we see in Somalia, quite tragically, that being a country that's had a crisis of one form or another since the early 90s, is that humanitarian aid, emergency aid, life-saving assistance is part of the local economy in many places. Yeah? And there are households living in a multi-generational way on unconditional cash. I'm a big believer in unconditional cash. I think it's great. But I think that to really understand resilience, as you ask, in a holistic way, we need to see the place of aid and cash in particular in the economy. Why? Because if you live on unconditional cash, then you are maladapted to climate change. Your capacities to respond to climate shocks are weakened. And then we create an enormous risk as an aid industry. Yeah. The climate crisis is definitely changing and evolving in Somalia, and I would say it's evolving in such a way that it's a precursor to the wider Horn. That is to say that the climate shocks that we respond to are bigger crises. They are deeper, they're longer. Affected households are more distributed, more scattered, and mobility is more and more a feature. Yeah? And that for me actually means that the boundary between resilience and humanitarianism is more and more blurry. If we're in the middle of a long-term multi-generational crisis, as we look to be, then the best way to think about resilience, I think, in the holistic sense, is to see it as life-saving. Yeah, life-saving interventions are those that strengthen people's capacities to respond to the shocks when they come, and that means for me that these kinds of livelihoods interventions that we make are life-saving and, in that sense, humanitarian. Yeah, so the distinction between the two gets very blurry. That for me is a pertinent point at this time when humanitarianism and resilience are both under threat in terms of their financing. Yeah. And for me, it's very clear that this is the right time to be investing in these livelihoods measures that boost resilience, and to see them really as a form of humanitarianism.
Thanks, Alex. Quite complicated, but doable. We have the governor. I think you can hear what happens, and we have the committee that maybe sometime try to work with the community in some areas becomes quite challenging, because the first thing they want to see is whatever you ask me, is it going to provide some food? Is it going to provide maybe that education for the child? Is it going to provide some health services for the family? So if we don't have that, then it becomes very hard to be sustainable, however good it is. Last but very important, Ivy, there was a publication last week, I think a week or two, where they said 1 out of 4 of the young people between the age of 12 and 25, they're undergoing some stress or some sort of depression. We're not very sure whether this is related to anything to do with climate change, or is because of what may be happening, maybe because of the ecosystem we are living in. So as we try to hand over the baton for the climate change mitigation, because you are the next person, not the next one, you are the actual actor in this. So I'm not sure, but you'll maybe to be able to kind of guide us. Do you think climate change has a correlation with health or well-being, especially of the young people?
Okay.
If so, are there opportunities from that challenge that you could be able maybe to take and be able to address that when using an opportunity that you can be able to, see the other side of the coin from the challenge?
Thank you. I'll respond to this question by doing a very short exercise with you. I hope you can trust me. So I'm a psychologist by profession, but I somehow found myself in this field. So let's see if you trust me, okay? I want you to get comfortable wherever you are, the most comfortable position. And if you feel comfortable enough, if you feel that this is a safe space for you, I'd love for you to close your eyes for a moment. If you feel that this is a safe space, feel free to close your eyes. I want us to take a deep breath in, hold it, and then slowly let it out. Deep breath in once again, hold it, let it out. Still, with your eyes closed, I want to invite you to imagine that you wake up tomorrow to the most dreadful natural disaster that you can think of. I don't know what's for you. Could be a devastating flood, a raging wildfire, a brutal drought, a cyclone that has ripped through your community, unbearable heat waves. Just pick what you think will be the worst natural disaster for you. And I want you to imagine how quickly your world is going to change. Your home, your school, your work, your day-to-day routines are permanently gone or disrupted. In that moment, I want you to picture what that would mean for your physical health. Basic things like being able to access clean water, assurance of a nutritious meal, medical care. And I want to draw your attention to your mind. Do you feel like it is safe for you to be in this space? Do you feel like there will be hope for tomorrow in the midst of this disaster? Do you think you'll be able to sleep normally, to focus, to dream about a future. And I want you to listen to your body now. How does this make you feel being placed in this type of a situation? Some sort of despair? Does your chest tighten a little bit? Is there a tummy turn? A cold shiver maybe? And I want to bring to your attention the fact that millions of young people around the world, for them, this is not an imagination like this simulation that we're doing, but a reality. And climate change isn't a future threat for them. It's the reason that they cannot finish school, they cannot pursue their dreams, they cannot be hopeful about tomorrow. As you gently open your eyes, I want to invite you to carry that feeling with you as we reflect on what resilience truly means, because when we treat well-being of young people and communities as an afterthought, we are leaving communities vulnerable despite our end goal being resilience. Take a deep breath in, hold it, let it out, and you can open your eyes. Okay. So just to build up on what we've been able to do, it's good that we have a lot of statistics and conversations on climate. But more often than not, physical health and mental health will always come as an afterthought. The most thing that we prioritize is ensuring that there's food, shelter, clothing, the very basics. And mental health and psychosocial support comes as just something very, very after. But I want you to imagine what that does to communities. There's already existing stigma on mental health as it is. The statistics that he's talking about are very real. And sometimes I feel like the numbers are actually even downsized because the reality happening on ground is very different. So when people are now exposed to things that they feel like they do not have control over, it makes the situation actually worse. So emotional numbness, there's the constant flashbacks, anxiety, panic and helplessness as a result of overload of information, or also the lack of enough information of it. I've seen a best practice that was done in Mozambique in 2019 during a cyclone that happened. Reduce their livelihoods, just like we're discussing, the loss of loved ones, a lot of uncertainty and also grief. So for them, mental health and psychosocial support was not part of the initial plan. It became some sort of reactive measure after they had settled the initial things. But they were able to, for example, come up with peer support groups within the displacement camps, where young people would sit down together with community members, that intergenerational dialogue, they share experiences, and that helped them to be able to regain a sense of community in knowing that I'm not alone and that I can be able to speak to someone and build their resilience. We also focused on doing a lot of child-centered support. So being able to now break MHPSS as a concept to this very young generation. So approaches like using art and play therapy, storytelling for them to process their emotions, because a kid might not be able to bring out in the same way that an adult does. And it helps them also to regain some sort of routine, because that's what kids are used to. The training of local healthcare workers, also to fill the gap shortage of mental health professionals, and for them to be able to offer what we call psychological first aid. So before something becomes bigger than it already is, being able to support it at that very young age. And finally, they saw the importance of being able to integrate mental health into primary healthcare, and this would involve a lot of streamlining of efforts. So it's important because communities will be able to recover their infrastructure, but people will not but people can easily remain stuck in cycles of trauma and invisible wounds. And simply because it's not a scar that we can see on the body, it doesn't mean that it's not there. And young people, climate enthusiasts are drivers of climate solutions, but they can only do this in their best state in terms of their mental and physical well-being. Truly, resilience building should be holistic, so let's not just focus on economic and political aspects. Let's also include aspects of physical, social, and mental well-being for the people that we serve. Preserve the dignity of these people because you ensure long-term adaptation and also sustainability of these efforts. So we cannot build resilient communities on exhausted bodies, on broken minds, and unhealed wounds. And if there are any opportunities that this can be done, there's currently not a lot of research in terms of what climate change is doing on the mental health of young people. So for the scientists, investment in research to be able to inform decisions and also map out what would be some of the best practices to approach. Integration of mental health and psychosocial support as a standard in preparedness. So training responders to be able to also address these issues in a culturally sensitive way and as a core component. And also collaboration between the climate and health sector. I think that's why I fell in love with this field, despite it being very new for me, different background. So co-creation of solutions that are able to handle both sides. And also integrating health and well-being in climate financing and policy, measurable outcomes for that long-term impact. So if we're talking about resilience, let it be with a holistic approach. And to answer you, yes, climate does have an impact on the health and well-being of people. Thank you.
I don't think I have anything to add on that. Right. So I think we have 5-6 minutes for any comment, feedback, or question from the audience to the panelists. So maybe start one here, then there'll be the lady there.
Thank you so much, panelists. Mine is more of a comment. I think talking about building resilience, this conference we've not mentioned approaches like agroecology, regenerative agriculture, though we might have mentioned some of the practices as we continued from yesterday. Circular economy to minimize on waste is very important, because most of the time we are talking about injecting more capital, more cash. But again, it's important for us to pick those practices that will help the communities build resilience with minimum external support. And agroecology is one of them, working with nature rather than working against it. Some of the disasters that we're experiencing are because of working against nature. But agroecology helps you to work through with nature so that it's the farm and more than the farm, beyond the farm, looking at the entire ecosystem approach. So these are skills that are very much necessary for the communities, and I think we should continue answering the question, what's next after this conference? How does this discussion trickle down to the user of the knowledge? So it's important to pick what works well. I like the example from Somalia, regenerating land using regenerative grazing approaches, very important, and incentivizing the communities used cash-based approaches. That's very important because most of the pastoral communities are suffering because of overgrazing, lack of land and use management, which is keeping them in a cyclical events of drought and disasters like floods. So we should continue answering the question of why floods in the first place, for example. If it's another disaster like death of livestock, which we see a lot in northern Kenya in cyclical manner, why does it happen? Why do we solve this problem? Why are the farmers not reducing their stock? Why are they not using the regenerative approaches in grazing so that they only have livestock that is enough for the land? So I think we have to put this together and make sure that it goes to the user. Thank you.
Comment taken. I think those are led behind there. Yep. Not the lady first.
Okay.
With the glasses.
Thank you. I think my question goes to Ivy. Yes, I really like that you touched on the mental health conversation, especially because it's real and it's happening. I'd also like to ask you that as people who work within this space, there's also the issue of exhaustion, burnout, balance when you work with people who are in vulnerable communities. And I think we can, almost a lot of us can relate to the fact that sometimes you meet people in very dire situations and it has a way of affecting you. How do you balance this kind of also, I don't know, like the mental health after effects of working with very vulnerable groups and in the space that we find ourselves with the nature of our work? Yeah. Thank you.
My question goes to Thomas from Wani University. I like your idea of community of practice. How can we have this interface between that community of practice and the academicians? I'm talking this because I work with women groups in Kilifi and youth groups. And oftentimes there is no interface between the researchers and what we are doing on the ground. So how can this be more intentional and more and deliberate? Because when you talk about green, blue economy, yeah, we want to extol that. The fisher folk, many of them are oftentimes illiterate. And the women that work along, like in our restoration of mangroves, they get disaster, they get health risks as they are doing grub fishing, they get bilharzia. So the researchers and this community of practice, who oftentimes are civil society and faith-based organization, how can we have an interface and to interact with one another?
Let's try to answer those ones. If time allows, we can answer.
Thank you so much. Yes, burnout is very real, and especially in this field. It can be exhausting when you go to communities and you see the kind of things they're exposed to, and there's not so much that you can do within your power. And sometimes even fighting with the bureaucratic processes involved in the work that you're doing, you're trying to push for policies, it can all be so draining. We can definitely not continue to risk burning out the very people that we are relying on for solutions. So for you at the forefront of this change, I will tell you something very simple. You cannot pour from an empty cup. If your glass is empty, you only give to the world what is inside of you. So take breaks. Talk to someone if you need to when it becomes also overwhelming. It can be somebody within the space to be able to get different perspectives and views. It can be somebody that is outside of your work. Take breaks, take care of your own self. And just like the climate chief told us yesterday, focus on what you can control. There's only so much that you can do. So as long as at the end of the day, you go to bed knowing that you did your best to be able to make a difference, that should be more than enough. There are resources available in most of the countries. I know about the Kenyan context, the event of free lines. If you need to speak to mental health professionals, please do that. But take care of yourself so that you're able to give to the world the beauty inside of you.
Thank you, Ivy. Even professors have stage fright. In the process of introducing, I forgot that my ever governor, His Excellency Otichile, is seated in the house. I recognize you, sir. Thank you. My colleague from Kilifi, community of practice without a knowledge partner is crippled. And so I feel ashamed that we have not met. So the first thing, the first solution, the silver bullet of a community of practice is communication. And you have done it very well because you've talked to me. So we are going to keep talking. Yeah, because I have to join that community of practice. Yeah, because essentially, we are changing the meaning of centers of excellence. Yeah, I got, of course, introduced to the best centers of excellence like Max Planck Institutes, and you know how they operate. But I would like to change that definition a bit so that the centers of excellence can move outside these fantastic laboratories and go into co-creation so that you include in your definition of a center of excellence the community of practice, where the users, the governor policymakers, and everybody else comes into the co-creation platform. Meaning any solution that is going to be born out of there will not be preserve of the academic or the preserve of the policymaker, or the preserve of the user, but it is a what you call a buy-in solution. And that's the only thing that can work going forward. We have been working with the farmer fiscals in your county, Honorable Governor. And what we did is we moved the operations to a farmer field school. That's why we did the trials. That's why we did the trainings. That's why we did the mobilization. That's why we did the dissemination, and science communication changed form because we were not bringing our high credit journal papers. We were using very simple communication like about the soil health. I like the agroecology perspective that has been spoken here. We explained to them, let me give these examples so that it will go into record. The soil, we compared it to a donkey. I think I mentioned it to somebody here yesterday. A donkey carries heavy luggage and it's such a fantastic beast of burden. And we give it work to do. So you give it work, you carry it every day, but you don't feed it, you don't treat its mental health. Yeah, you punish it. One day, what will happen? Thank you. The donkey will collapse. And when the donkey collapses, will you get your water? So we told the farmers, now transfer, I like your example because you transfer that donkey, that's your soil. You're feeding the plant, you're feeding yourself, but you don't care about the soil. What will happen? The soil will collapse. And one day you put your inorganic fertilizers and your pesticides and nothing happens. Even after doing some fantastic fertilizing, no crop is growing because the soil has collapsed. And the farmers, if you talk to the farmers in Notichidos County, His Excellency here, they will give you that story because they understood that soil health is integral to climate resilience. Thank you.
So I'm reminded the topic's good, but the time is up. All right.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for our wonderful panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of the C4 ICRAF CEO, Elian, and COO, Filippo Sano, as we get ready to introduce the next course on today's intellectual menu, very special one. I am told it is delicately gathered in the hills of Kigali. It is grounded in the plains of Uganda, seasoned in Dakar, sauteed by the lakes of Ethiopia, and served in Nairobi. Ladies and gentlemen, land use, agriculture, food systems, bioeconomy resilience. It gives me great pleasure to welcome, first and foremost, Usman Badiane, Executive Chairperson, Academia 2063. Welcome to the stage. Sheikh Mbo, Professor and Director General, Centre de Suivi Écologique. Welcome. Suvi, thank you. Amos Amanubo, Africa Regional Direct Coordinator, Global Landscapes Forum. Amos, welcome. Round of applause, please. Merid Getahun, International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology. Welcome. Paul Ntakanio, Associate Professor, Genetics and Plant Breeding and Registrar Planning, Administration and Finance, University of Embu. Thank you. And to moderate the session, Kim Geheb, Senior Scientist, C4 ICRAF. Welcome. Over to you, sir.
Okay. So thank you very much. Just very quickly, my name is Kim. Today we're going to be, or for this session, we're going to be looking at resilience in land use, agriculture, food systems, and the bioeconomy. And we've already had an introduction to the panelists here. And just to emphasize that these are panelists who live and breathe resilience in the agriculture, food system, bioeconomy, and land use areas. And so we're extremely fortunate to have such an experienced panel to be able to share together their experience and their outlook on resilience in these areas. Okay, so I think that this session is going to be run more or less as other sessions during this conference have been implemented. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pose a question to each one of the panelists. I've asked them to please limit their answers to approximately 7 minutes, mostly because I think it'd be great if we could include the audience in the conversation towards the end of the session. So with that, I'm going to start with the questions. I'm going to run in alphabetical order, so as not to privilege anybody. This is the danger of not being as digital as one should be. And so the first question goes to Mr. Amos Amanubo. We're all experiencing the limitations and the increasing restrictions on overseas development assistance and other aid initiatives in our careers and the work that we do. So, Mr. Amanuba, in light of this, how can we leverage Africa's natural economy to build resilience and self-sustainability? And where do you think the opportunities for meaningful returns on investment and resilience exist to address this funding gap? Big question.
Thank you very much, Kim. Yeah, I've always enjoyed the privilege of that alphabetical order getting spotlighted first. Ordinarily I'm a farmer by background, trained forester and a human geographer. Not super much an ODA specialist, but also the thoughts that I share here are really thoughts, from my experience. And also a few weeks ago, we had the GLF Africa conference here, and, a lot of key messages came through in terms of how to navigate these challenging times, which also present lots of opportunities. And it's good that we talk about, the concept of resilience, but this is the big elephant in the room. The fallacy of resilience is something that we haven't talked about, when the whole sense of your resilience is dependent on a certain kind of architecture or some sort of support that from time to time you might not have control over. And this year, since this year began, we've seen a lot of shocks go through from that angle. We've had a lot about the tariffs, about the aid cuts, and the carpet has been pulled from our feet. And so the question is, what next? And I do not see this as a problem itself, but I see it as the symptoms of a very flawed development system that we have been running. Since the aid cuts, we've been hearing about project stalling. I know that many of you here are leaders in your own capacity that have been beneficiaries of these kinds of systems. So the question for us lingering around is, what next? And we know that, the ODA has been contributing. Under the ODA, there is this kind of commitment to contribute for the developed countries to contribute about 0.7% of their gross national income. Only 5 countries have been meeting that. That's Norway, Denmark, Germany, I've forgotten the other two. Sweden, probably. But then, you know, besides that loss there is still a huge climate finance deficit in Africa, about, you know, up to 77%. We know that we only receive about 5% of the global climate finance that reaches Africa, and more than half of that comes in form of loans, which sort of challenges the concept of resilience. It's kind of a lock-in. And then beyond that, only about 3% actually reaches to the farmers down there where it is needed. And so we can see what we are racing against. Yesterday we had about, you know, the climate disasters that are happening that make the continent lose between 2 to 5% of the GDP. We know that there is a very huge land degradation neutrality finance deficit. And so we find ourselves in these very precarious times. And the question is, how can we build resilience when a lot of our systems are dependent on a form of external support? You know, the whole concept of resilience in itself is something that we need to unpack. And so last 2 weeks ago, when we were gathered here on 19th June, there was a shared sentiment, you know, about the need for Africa to build a new regenerative African-led development model that is nature positive, that is socially equitable, and also that is economically competitive or regenerative. A development blueprint that reflects the local climate, the culture and the capacity and the opportunities. And so talking about opportunities, I don't want to get stuck in the book of Lamentations. It's good to move to the book of opportunities. And talking about opportunities, you know, how can we unlock these opportunities? And Kim, this is the question that came through. And where do the opportunities exist? Luckily, there is a very growing momentum on the concept of the nature economy or natural capital. We realize that there is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity that exists for the continent, and the core components are really what we are discussing here: land, food systems, and the bioeconomy. But then, how can we, you know, transform those? We haven't even scrapped the surface of our natural capital. Yeah, that is a very huge foundation for our resilience. And you know, if what I say is not true, we can reflect quickly on the resilience score or index, the relationship between the resilience score and index, and, you know, the economic prosperity of, you know, the affluent countries, whether they are engaged in the similar discussions as we are in relation to resilience. What I'm saying is that we shouldn't reproduce those old extractive patterns that are abusive to nature, but rather we should undertake a very rigorous valuation and accounting of our natural capital, both its intrinsic values and the asset value, and to see how to leverage those in meaningful ways to build our own resilience as a continent. And so quickly, you know, 3 key points that came out of GLF Africa and that we can all agree that a very huge potential for Africa. We need to start moving away from talking about potential towards actually action on the ground. I think the promise of agri-food systems, as you know, as is a component of this session or panel, is very you know, unspoken of or underrated. We know that we have, you know, 60% of the arable land, yet Africa continues to be a net importer of food. That's something that's really alarming. We can't even talk about food security, leave alone food sovereignty, when you are a net importer of food. You have all these natural resources. And moving beyond that, we essentially consume what we produce and we produce what we don't consume. And that is something that needs to change there. But moving beyond that, we need to look at, within the promise of agri-food systems, how to really transform the livelihoods of smallholder farmers who are actually the backbone of food security, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. You have, you know, this group of people that were yesterday or, in other spaces labeled as very high risk and uninvestable because of the returns on investment there. But these people feed up to 80% of they provide food security for up to 80% of sub-Saharan Africa. And that is something that we cannot afford to underestimate, because if you overlook that and don't invest there, then you are essentially losing on food security in the continent. And so we ought to invest in that really, really heavily, and they're very high returns on investment if it is done well. Because at the moment, we lose about 30% in post-harvest losses. That's a very huge, that's more than the international development aid that Africa receives. And so if we convert that 30% through meaningful investment streams, what can it unlock in terms of resilience? Two quick more points. The wider bioeconomy is something that is of a very high potential for Africa. This was mentioned at the conference as well. Peter Minang's here, and he's been a very huge proponent of unlocking Africa's bioeconomy because of what is in there. And a few, data that was mentioned during this conference was that we actually, in the bioeconomy, we only capture about 6 to 9% of the biomass value, which accounts for 10 to 15% of Africa's GDP. What if we raise that 6 to 9% to 50%? What could that account for? That is a very, very huge opportunity in that area. And then lastly, I just want to quickly talk about land itself. When we normally talk about the primary production factors or primary capitals, land is a very huge primary capital for many people across Africa and everywhere else. And, we know that 60% of Africa's land is arable, but then the rate of degradation is so high. And we cannot afford to abuse this primary capital, because if all capitals are not there, at least you have the assurance of two capitals. You have the land and you have the labor. And what can you produce out of that? Yeah, I will quickly stop it there, but pass it on to Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, Amos. Dr. Badiane. So another of Africa's immense resources is, of course, its traditional knowledge systems. So how can we meaningfully harness these to shape an inclusive and context-specific bioeconomy that reflects local strengths and innovation?
Thank you, Kim, and good morning to everyone. The concept in terms of bioeconomy is perhaps new, right? But the practice itself is old in many societies. Whether you look at food, energy, therapeutics, cosmetic, construction materials, regular day-to-day tools across Africa and the world, traditional communities have been using available resources around them, including biomass, to fashion those, right? So therefore, it is possible in every corner of the globe, if one looks carefully, to find practices, skills, knowledge, and products to build on as we develop the bioeconomy. Okay, maybe it's the mic. Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. All right. So for those who didn't just hear, I was saying that the concept of bioeconomy may be new, but the practice is old in Africa and anywhere else. You will find traditional communities basically practicing bioeconomy through the food, the tools, therapeutics, cosmetics, construction materials, and other things that they create and produce from natural resources, biomass, and others available to them around their communities. And that could serve as an entry point from the skills, the knowledge, as well as the products to expand and grow the bioeconomy. But because of that, bioeconomy has a local dimension, right? Your topography, agroecology, geobiophysical parameters, your cultural preferences, your social norms, all those things actually determine in which direction and what the potential a bioeconomy can take as you move forward. So every locality, therefore, has a unique set of conditions and resources, endogenous knowledge that will shape its trajectory in terms of what's possible in terms of bioeconomy. And more closely related to your question, the locality of the knowledge of the resources provides entry points to build on if you want to develop the bioeconomy. What is similar here is if you look at the food processing sector, traditionally in Europe or anywhere else, it started with taking homegrown recipes into plants, and then from there, innovate, bring new products and new processes. And that's what I think bioeconomy is going to be taking as a trajectory in Africa. At least if you want to build on traditional knowledge, we'll have to see how we can start by improving bioeconomy products that are available traditionally. If you look at the emerging processing sector in Africa today, most of it are really processing our traditional dishes into better packaged, ready to cook, ready to eat foods. But those are available based on traditional knowledge, traditional skills in the house, and we can do that definitely here. The added ingredient, though, for bioeconomy is that we're bringing new science and new technology to apply it to the process of creating new goods, new products, and new services. So that brings in new sets of actors that will be working together and using the knowledge skills traditionally, the resources traditional to create new products, new processes. What the interface is going to be between these new sets of actors and how you could use the new technology, how you can create the institutional environment, the policy, and the regulatory environment so that these two sets of actors can add value to each other. An emerging private sector, science-based, that is going to be needed to scale bioeconomy, to bring the innovations that we need to be a driving force in the economies. Make sure that it lives side by side, at some point integrated with the traditional systems, adds value. So the issue of avoiding misappropriation, creating fairness, making sure that the value of the traditional communities, their contribution is recognized, that benefits are shared, that they can thrive, how you can bring the tools, the knowledge, the new processes into the rural area so they too can be part of a thriving bioeconomy. So you don't have this dichotomy between a modern bioeconomy sector, science-based, private sector driven, modern, and then probably delinked from the traditional community. So bring them on if you want to build on the knowledge that we have traditionally, use it as an entry point, but cater to the traditional communities, create the policy, the regulatory, and the knowledge base for the rural communities to be able to contribute vigorously to a growing bioeconomy and benefit from it just like the new sector would do. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you. Very thought-provoking, yes. So, Dr. Getahan, you are a livestock specialist, and yet you are in an insect center. How does that happen?
Yeah.
You can answer that in a moment, but of course the livestock sector is blamed for a lot of our greenhouse gases. So my question for you is perhaps a little bit obvious. How can livestock contribute to sustainable and resilient food systems?
Yeah, thank you, Kim. As Kim said, I'm from ECP. We study insects. Insects are very important, I think, for sustainability. They are pollinators. They are also protein, so they can be food. They are decomposers. But today I'm not talking about insect. As Kim said, I will talk about livestock. And then
Livestock are very important, globally. In fact, especially in our continent. I think in the morning you ate maybe egg or milk. I wish I would have seen milk or cow on the previous poster. But as Kim said, the role of livestock for sustainability is polarized due to climate, related issues and so many things. But they are very important for soil health and function. They provide microbes and metabolites which are very useful for the functionality of soil, it's very important. The other one is, for example, when it comes to land use, for example, if you see in our continent globally, most of the lands are arid and semi-arid, which is not suitable for crop farming. But you can easily, or you can use that land using livestock, especially like camel or small ruminant, which are very efficient in converting their diet and a small amount into useful proteins, because they have very good microbes and metabolites in the rumen. If you study that, we'll talk more like a researcher here now. So those are important. We need to capitalize. Yes, we have to listen the concern, the complaint, but we have to, using science, we need to address those things. For example, what we are doing is we manipulate the diet. For example, sometimes we incorporate insect as a source of diet. For example, when we combine the insect-based diet with the conventional diet for chicken, we significantly reduce greenhouse gas emission, for example, nitric oxide or methane. That means, so we still, livestock are very important, but we need to make them, of course, climate smart and resilient as well. The other important thing that we are doing is also to make them healthy. Healthy livestock are, they are productive. If the animal is sick, they don't give out a service. The professor mentioned in the morning donkeys. Livestock are very important source of proteins. We use them to track land. They are transported, but they also have to be healthy. So that's why we came in. We study insect vectors, vector-borne diseases, to manage those diseases that affect livestock. So the livestock become healthy. They also become, resilient to climate-related changes that we have to address in this one. So that's when I say healthy livestock is very important. We study the health of livestock. We study their diets. We manipulate the environment, the microbe. I said the rumens. For example, sometimes we compare animals, which animals are more climate smart than the others. So that is there a way that we can learn from camel, we bring it into cow to make cow green. Those are what we are doing at the moment, as I said. So, but we need support, like science has to be there, not polarizing, but we need to support livestock. So Kim, I said we don't study insect alone, but we study their interaction with plant, their interaction with human, with environment, with animals. So that's what I can say. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So just to draw attention to, of course, when we get into systems sides of things, it's the interrelationship between the elements that becomes incredibly interesting from a resilience perspective. So I appreciate the relationships that you draw attention to there. The next question goes to Professor Sheikh Mbao. So now this is a big question. But I feel confident that you'll be able to answer it. Why should we focus on agricultural vulnerability to shocks, and how do you think we can do that?
Thank you so much. I think you're right. It's a big question. But before I deep dive into the question, I would like to bring the attention to the audience and to my fellow panelists that we are having this kind of meeting many times in Africa, where we think of food security, vulnerability. This year, it's maybe my third or fourth conference. And every time you can be shocked by the level of understanding of the science committee, the policymakers, the stakeholders, of what needs to be done differently to put Africa in a better place. So what have been forgotten? What did we miss? Is to go from the current rhetorics, which are all great, to more realism and intentionality into putting things into actions. When I attended in 2015 on the behalf of ICRAF, my DG Tony Simon sent me to Dakar in my home country. It was a huge meeting on feeding Africa. Bajan was on the driving seat. We had endless sleepless night to build the whole African compact for investment, many billions, to change the continent from being a net importer of food to a net exporter of food. And luckily, I was in Dakar too as well, where we moved from the flagship approach to a more country compact approach. Every country should prioritize their investment to transform the food system in our countries. Then we went to New York, the World Food Summit. Then we went to the Academy of Vatican. Then we went to Kampala. He was also in the driving seat because he is one of the brain masters in the Kampala, resilience agriculture. A new declaration is put on the table. After Malabo 10 years, we have been successful. We are like circling around an issue, and without being very intentional, we can keep having meetings and the food security will not come. And the bottom line is the following. Do you know how much Africa spent to import food every year? How much? Billions. I give you the scale. It's billions of US dollars. It's about between 40 to 50 billions invested into taking food from other continent to our continent to feed ourselves. And do you know how much we export at the same time? Less than 30 billion. So there is a delta of 25 to 30 billion USD, which is lost by Africa just to feed its population. And the last Dakar meeting we had, the level of investment that the continent need to be a net, from a net importer to a net exporter is exactly that delta of 30 billion. So if you manage to have 30 billion or save 30 billion, invest it into local farmers, we will really save the continental needs in terms of food. And one thing which has been happening in many conferences, which I tried to deconstruct, is that smallholder farmers is not as performance as conventional farmers. That's not true. That's definitely not true. Because where we buy food from India, from China, from Indonesia, and the like, they're dominated by smallholder farmers. The thing is they have developed possibilities to adapt their farming system into smallholder farming processes. And I'm happy to say, because of this frustration, we developed in CSE a project of $10 million to support family farming. But they need access to water, seed, fertilizers, etc. Accelerate their production. Without that investment, they cannot just boost the yield gap which they have in a daily basis. So the first fundamental question is how to reconvert from the net importing food or to the net exporting food scheme that we have. And there is endless possibilities that Amos that has just mentioned. And I'm pleased to say it again. Maybe people who have heard me speaking about food security have heard that several times. Africa is the only continent with 2 summers. Right now, we have a summer in Southern Africa. Everything which is south of hemisphere. And it was the only continent which has the equator almost in the middle. If you take any other continent, Europe is totally on the northern hemisphere. US is totally on the northern hemisphere. Latin America is totally on the southern hemisphere, etc. almost, roughly. But Africa is the only continent which has the equator in the middle. So in any time and every hour, any season, we can produce something which is extremely important for food security in some parts of Africa. Creating a Pan-African food security exchange under ZLECA and all those mechanisms of African Union is something we should be very intentional about because we can achieve it. The second thing is that in terms of using the water potential and the land potential, I'll come back to that. The water potential, first, the irrigation system is less than 5%. And we have all the biggest river of the world, the Nile, the Congo Basin, Senegal, Niger, Limpopo, name it. You just go across Africa. You have big rivers, big lakes. Water is the fundamental input for agriculture, and we have it. And you say we have 60% of the arable land. Let me challenge you there. I have yet to see them. Where is the 6% of the arable land? If you say 6% of potential valuation of the land, because rangeland is part of the livelihood system, and 28% of that 60% are actually rangelands. And I'm talking for the livestock person that we need also to value those rangelands. Animal, dairy, meat is part of the scheme. So But if you package everything, land is a big potential in Africa, more than any other continent in terms of potential. Then you take the energy to loop the circle. Renewable energy in all sense. Africa is a continent of the renewable energy in a sense. If you go to Karen here, you have windmills. You have, if you go to Hillgates in Kenya, you will have geothermal resources and solar energy, all name it, all know. So you have land, you have water, you have fertile land, and you have the youth. 60% of our population is below 35 years old. So all the ingredients are there to really have a deep, profound, rapid transformation of our agricultural system. So we need to have a new slogan here. Let's fix it. We can't just keep thinking. We have thought enough to be able to implement actions on the ground. Now, when it comes to the shocks, and that's where I would like to finish my statement, the other frustration being a scientist is that we stay on the macro level of shocks and vulnerability. Oh, aridity is a problem, yes. Flood is a problem, yes. Locust invasion is a problem, yes. Market shocks, non-climate factors are all shocks. But we never detangle those shocks and try to understand their practical implications on food production. What aridity, let me stay on aridity a bit to explain you what I say. Aridity means that you lose water, salinization of water is increasing, microbiota is decreasing, people can move from one place to another to look for water, conflicts can arise. If we don't get to that granularity of the sub-indicators of aridity, we would not target the interventions that will fix the counterfactual, the effects of aridity on the population. So it's very important to go 1 mile forward in understanding what those indicators, which are global in nature, means to the local farmers which face those problems in a daily basis. And there is 3 prongs that I want to share in submission I want to share with you. What has happened, what would have happened before the shocks, what would have happened during the shocks, and what would happen after the shocks. And one example with the flooding that we have in the Senegalese River, Gambia River last year, I was in the middle of the emergency plan of Senegal. Before the shocks, we have all the alert and early warning, but excuse me, nobody was. We are very exhausted in bringing the good news and the good information, and nobody's listening. They should help us, and Governor, please be our advocate in saying, these guys have been meeting and meeting, reporting and reporting, and energy is getting down. If you see the white hairs of this guy, he's a young man. He has been doing this for many years, but he must be exhausted of saying the same thing. So alert, early warning, let's respect those early warning. Recently in Rwanda, there was this observation to early warning systems, good information there, and nobody's taking care of that. Preparedness, planning ahead, preparing the communities, and many things that we can do before. And during the crisis, what they don't know is always more expensive to come during the turmoil of a crisis. The roads are completely destroyed. The transportation system becomes a problem. The connectivity is not there anymore. The emotional behavior of people does not lead them to be very logical in the way they intervene on the land. It's extremely difficult. But if we don't have ways to prepare ourselves, not just waiting for World Food Program, not just waiting for UNHCR to give us food that we normally don't consume. My father was a head of district, and he was asked during the 80s drought to distribute food. But the food ends being bags in our house, and that says they don't want it because they don't know it. And now I grow up and I realize that wheat, which they ask them to boil with some salt, is very different from the millet, which they traditionally know. During those emergency plan, let's just don't dump food that comes from northern countries, there are communities who does not know that. How can we make the system in a way that the food which is used in emergency is a food which is locally bound, produced in good season, and then we can redistribute it. And then after the crisis, it's always an opportunity, as Amos said. When the water flood and go away, land remaining are fertile for new growth. So let's use the good seeds for them. Let's create the transformation processes for the food. Let's make sure that we have the good silos to keep the food on the shelf for a longer time. Let's reduce the food waste, and let's make those products being transformed within Africa to create the value addition for the communities. The more I can say, and this is more emotion than science, as you can see. I've been in the business for 25 years. I've worked for ICRAF in many institutions. I have the impression that we're going in the same circle, and we're not moving forward. Let's fix it and let's move forward, as Gonzalez says this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mbao. And certainly, when we open up this session to comments from the floor, it would be really great to hear your own reflections on, in particular, not being heard or not being listened to, given that we already have the wisdom and the tools and the knowledge to understand what's going wrong and indeed how to fix it. Okay. So our final question for the panel goes to Professor Ntakanu. Thank you. So this session here is looking at the resilience of land use, agriculture, food systems, and the bioeconomy. Now, how does this apply to your current research on maize and food production? Paul.
Thank you very much. Like your Vanda, my name is Professor Paul Ndakanu. I work at the University of Embu, although it's written registrar planning, but currently I'm acting DVC, academic research and extension. And the whole issue which has been talked here about the youth, of course, I deal with them on a day-to-day basis, and that is where now we are going to innovate. Now, coming to my topic, and I want to pose a question, which is one of the kind of innovations in early 20th century, which brought the boost in food security, but a curse. And maybe I can ask and then also answer it so that it not become so scientific. And this is the making of nitrogenous fertilizer around 1902 by this somebody called the Happen-Bush, the process of Happen-Bush process. Brought the nitrogenous fertilizer. However, to produce 1 kg of nitrogenous fertilizer, you produce 3 kgs of carbon dioxide. That's it, yeah. Now, I ask the question to the audience. Which are the greatest threats of human survival, one in SDG 2 and one in SDG 13? Okay. And tied to that, and these are military threats to human survival. One of them is hunger, and the other is the climate change. And these are all those who have been told earlier about the aspect of stress, mental health, comes around here. And since I'm in genetics, I don't want to talk about genetics here and all those. I want to come to the food because, of course, the genetic potential in all those is really enormous. And being the last to talk about this one, of course, I can be able to give some of the solutions to all this. Now, I want to tell you my journey because this is about the things I've been doing. Now, the topic I'm talking about here is land use, agribusiness, food system. Those are plus. The end results, all of us want economy and bioeconomy, you know? Only that now you are talking of economic which is geared by biological system. But what is the threat to this economy? The biggest monster here, the threat, is the climate change. And here we are about to talk this serious. All of us, we have been talking about the problem,
But I think the resilience have been about 2%. Sorry, I was not here yesterday, but what I've heard today is more of the threats, but then we need to bring resilience. Now, out of all this like climate change, few things have come. Of course, greenhouse gases, droughts has been coming, food shortages and all that. And as a geneticist and plant breeder, I come there so that I can give that resilience. And what I can say that the genetic potential to solve the climate change, including the stress, the human survival is really major. However, we need them to exploit it. Because it has been mentioned about the tropics, the sunshine. This sunshine is the ones who drive the food making, the photosynthesis. How much do we make it? This is where you're coming in. After realizing then, the greenhouse gases, we have a lot of waste there. After realizing there's droughts, then we need crops which are drought tolerant. I basically mainly breed or research on rice, basmati, because that's what Kenyans like most, the maize. I came to realize then in rice, we need a basmati because which is drought tolerant, because the current basmati uses a lot of water. We have a shortage of water which can be used for agriculture. So as we talk, I have an innovation on a basmati which can grow on a dry land just like maize. And I call that one an achievement because it's now going to reduce the stress on water. The other item we have come is, you realize traditionally, we plant maize using seedlings. For maize to grow, seedlings to about 10 centimeters, it requires about 2 weeks. 7 days from the soil, about another 7 days. And maybe another 3 weeks to become what we call a transplantable seedling. Now we have come with something we call the bio-based fertilizer. And this bio-based fertilizer, it may be confused with the manure, but it is not. And that's where also the genetics is coming in. But first, about the maize. Now we realize if this maize, which is traditionally planted as seedlings, can be planted, as a seed, direct seeding, can be planted as a seedling. And let me illustrate. Like for example, the rain comes in October 15th around where I work. That's around the equatorial region there, around Embu. But we have September, which is really a lot of drought, no water. If you could plant seedlings, maize seedlings, and they grow for about 3 to 4 weeks before the rain comes, then they'll be growing and we are able to evade drought and then have our crop as normal. The innovation come. Maize is normally planted as seedling. If you transplant it, of course, there's a big shock and it will not survive. And that is where we're innovating now. The biofertilizer we have produced, first, it is these innovations so that when the maize comes, it goes with kind of a sticking, for lack of good word, let me put the soil, so that when it goes, it continues survival without the transplantation shock. And you have done the tests. Actually, only that I was not doing presentation, I could have done presentation. And the yield is not affected. But the innovation is not about the biofertilizer. The innovation is the carrier material, which enables the seedlings to go with growth material to the soil, and then it continues surviving as usual and retain its potential. Now, this biofertilizer comes to a number of facilities, and I want to move fast because of time. I was timing myself, 7 minutes and gone. It comes with immunoboosting capability. It is able to enable crops to resist nematode in the form of immunizing. Where the genetics come is we have realized some, and allow me not to go direct because it's an innovation which is under process, of boosting the nitrogen level and that's where we are putting the innovation, to compete with the Harper-Buch process, the chemical method, so that we use the biological system instead of a chemical system. In other words, instead of pumping 3 kilograms of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for 1 kg, we are able to use a biological system. And one of the issues in biofertilizer is to carry diseases from one soil to another, from one farm to another. Then through a manufacturing system, through the pyrolysis, we're able to kill all those diseases. And of course, using the solar energy, we're able to do all that. And lastly, what we are going to do now is the genetic potential so that you can be able to enhance the photosynthesis. Because my time is over and was given 7 minutes, is 7.5 minutes. I want to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oop, mic drop. Okay, thank you. Maybe a round of applause for some serious wisdom here. Some excellent reflections on how we can achieve resilience in these in the areas that this session is addressing. So I want to open it up for 15 minutes we have to the floor. Does anybody want to comment, reflect, question? Thank you.
Thank you. That was really fantastic. Such a great discussion. And I was hoping to kind of circle back a little to Priscilla's remarks from the first panel. This is something that I think a lot about, which is as these impacts of climate change become more severe, it will impede our ability to do what we need to do to actually make ourselves more resilient. And so we've heard a lot of conversations about that in this panel as well, too. So the immediacy of the moment that Professor Mbao really channeled for us this morning, I worry a lot about that our communities are getting hit multiple times now. Where I come from, you can see it's harder and harder every time. I can't imagine what it's like to be in some of the communities that you described. So I'm curious, like you do, it's the same situation here. It's a different set of facts, but we do know what to do. And yet so much talk and little movement forward. And I'm curious for you talked about this Pan-African plan where there could be more food production happening here and more ownership over those processes. And what is the key barrier? What is preventing that from happening here? That's my question. And just thanks again for the immediacy of the remarks.
A short response to a big questions. First of all, I think in all declaration of African Union, there was a deliberate cap of investment in agriculture, which has never happened in Africa. Agriculture is a business. It's not just an activity. We should not allow our farmers to have the potential or opportunity only to farm for 3 months, particularly in the Sahel, and rest for 9 months. Then it's an activity. If it's a professional, you get a vacation for 1 month and 11 months of the year you work, and you have to get the investment, the right investment to do that. Number one. Number two, the agricultural policy are almost influenced by the Northern world. FAO, if they're not here, they excuse me. But food security in Africa is not related to the 5 crops which are reported by FAO. We have more than 100 species, and I'm very, right place to say that. The orphan crops lab is just across here. We have listed in CSC 120 species of what they call wild fruits and neglected plants that can all contribute not only to the quantity of food, but to the quality of food. But those foods are often stigmatized. Those people coming from West Africa knows that baobab trees are called the bread of the monkey. That was a colonial name. We have never named baobab the bread of the monkey. It's baobab, it's mabuyu if you come to Nairobi. It's important. And rich in vitamin C, good in the oil, vitamin E in the much better than olive oil, etc. And you have many tens of plants like that. But you look at the food security policies in our countries, none of those species are there. The fonio, the gluten-free, all those big high-protein species, and they call it bambara beans or manga beans or whatever. The local name is very sexy and attractive. How can you promote a species which is called monkey of the bread if you go to China or Japan and say, hey, I have the monkey bread, you know? Nobody will buy it. The marketing is not right, and we should deconstruct with African. When I'm talking with my African fellow. We should make the deconstructions of that. And third thing is really the sense of possibilities. You know, when you get the river, you get the soil, and you're selling your land with the land grabbing. There's something which is not right on our mind. Why do you give your best land for export crop, which will never allow you to buy food? The cocoa, coffee, rubber, palm oil has been sold for decades, and they have never helped us to have enough cash to buy food. So if export crop cannot help you to buy enough food, so you have to revisit your national policy in food security. There are many more I can say. It's just some teasers and hints that I want to share with you, but the question is big, and we need to reflect together to find a solution.
Thank you. Let me just go. We have to remember that there's a whole other world out there listening in on this conversation, and we have a question from Helen. I'm assuming that this is going to Dr. Getahun. With the kind of livestock keeping and management systems we have in Africa, is livestock really a major contributor to climate change?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. As I said, highly polarized. We still, for example, you know, if you see, yes, greenhouse production inside the rumen is quite a lot, but what they emit is very small. Let's say, take, for example, camel. Camel emit 2% what is produced inside the rumen. Then especially if you see the system, the way, you know, we study a lot in the northern Kenya, which is a pastoral system. So, yeah, I think there are too much without data. A lot without a lot of scientific evidence that I can say. That's why I answered them.
Thank you. From the floor, Eliane. No bias here.
Kim is trying to compensate for the mantle. So one reflection, and it's really builds on what all of you are saying. The catalytic issue we have is how we finance that 30 billion difference. How are we going from science to business model to financial projections to cases where banks, investment banks, venture capitalists, all types of investment vehicles really finance the local production of foods and foods that matter to Africans. And many of the crops are women's crops. And so there's the issue of how do we integrate that gender dimension, but more importantly, how do we finance the diversity? And we shouldn't even call them orphan crops. They are African crops that have nourished us for centuries.
Thank you. All right, what are you?
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Khalid. I'm a founder of a local initiative called Ogo Initiative, and it's advocate for water. But my question is different today. As we're speaking about the future and also the market and all these things, and also the education, maybe we miss the indigenous knowledge about the African, when you are in African context. So last month I was visited in irrigation scheme they call Miwa in Kirinyaga County in Kenya. So they grow a lot in rice production in Kenya. So they have one problem. It was golden snail have eaten all the production they have produced, and they was finding the solution for that thing. instead of going back to the indigenous knowledge and getting the crabs to eat these snails, they go to the Western idea, or maybe the knowledge that they have get from the university of maybe the others. So they were asking you us the solution. So instead of going and keeping that one as crabs, because the crabs, they can eat the nails. So they go to the pesticide and they spread all the scheme. And that's and cause us a disease, something like this, or maybe a cancer, something like that. So I'm asking the panelists, are we considering the indigenous knowledge, or we are just going to the other thing that in the Western areas? Thank you so much.
Perhaps because you were speaking to knowledge, Dr. Badiane, maybe you could.
Thank you. Before I get to that one, if you just allow me 2 minutes on the ag performance and the imports gap and the 30 billion. There's a publication called Annual Trends and Outlook Report, which we've been producing for nearly 20 years. And it is in the 2013 edition that we brought up the issue of the import bill for the first time. In that edition, we saw that in 2001, Africa was exporting about $11 billion worth of ag and food products and importing $11 billion. It was even in 2001. By 2011, Africa was exporting 45 billion worth of agricultural foods and crops, but importing 77 billion in that first decade that gap took place. If you look at what happened since then, it has grown more. It's in the 2 decades where African agriculture has performed the best. Most people wouldn't know, but if you go back and you look at the statistics over the last 20 years, Africa's agriculture has grown faster than any other region in the world. What is driving these imports is not poor performance in agriculture, but population growth and economic growth, higher purchasing power. So more people to feed and more money to buy the food, and that's what's happening. So I think what we ought to be doing is just to accelerate and continue what we've done over the last 20 years so that we can grow agriculture faster. But it's going to take a little bit longer for this gap to disappear if we continue to grow economically and with young population just growing. But the good news about that is that we have a market guaranteed to our farmers if we can boost production and as much as we want. We don't have to go and fight a lot for other markets. So that's the way to look at it. However, how do we do that, Eliane and others? What we've done right over the last 20 years, and we shouldn't undo it. We have new generation of leaders, and we don't have institutional memory. Africa did a lot of things wrong in the 70s and 80s. If it were not what happened in the 70s and 80s, actually, in 2000, we would have been exporting more than we're importing. It wouldn't be where we're here today. It's mistakes we made, kicking out the private sector, controlling prices, wanting government to do everything, not paying farmers for their products, and a lot of other things we did, undermined performance. And there are risks to return to that. Let's focus on technology. Let's focus on getting seed systems that work, private sector based, somebody who wakes up every day, think about how am I going to get seeds to the farmers. Let's think about making sure our borders are open for trade to create market for our farmers. There's a lot of things we have been doing a little bit right here and there. We continue that trajectory, and I think we should be able to do that. Indigenous knowledge, to close with that, you don't have to do everything new, right? And indigenous knowledge that have survived centuries must be right. That's why it's there, right? So how do you build on that? How do you augment it? How do you modernize it, right? So there are a lot of opportunities there for us to look at that and do things better. They happen to be most adapted to the local condition. So therefore, looking the other way is losing opportunities for doing things better. But we shouldn't romanticize it either. We are flying around the world. We didn't have planes several decades ago. So the modern technology isn't bad. is good, right? But we have to bring both together into the same tent and use as much as we can. Thank you.
Right. And that's an excellent note. I'm sorry, this is the end of the session. I appreciate your participation. I appreciate the panelists. Thank you all for an excellent and invigorating conversation.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Thanks once again to our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, a couple of announcements. As they take their photograph, just a few announcements from myself. One, we'll be having a group photograph immediately. So we'll walk straight next to the famous aircraft staircase. There'll be people to direct you in that direction. Then we will be having a quick coffee break. And I've been reminded to tell you that coffee is being served on both sides. And it's the same amount of coffee, same amount of snacks, it's all the same. So you don't have to all be on one side. All right, so we'll convene, we can begin moving towards the photo session area.